So we have our webinar today on exchanges. And, I identified them, or I referred to them as always a very distinctive feature of any birth chart. What's the immediate effect that I talked about when two planets are in exchange? What's the first thing we should be thinking of, and what effect does it have on the planets?
Source of strength.
Gives them an immediate source of strength, right? So they're going to give their results strongly, whatever those results are, favorable or unfavorable, right? Or mixed. And then what's the other major effect of any exchange between house lords?
Connection. They get connected
It strongly
in the best possible way.
Right, it strongly connects the two house lords and their indications, right? And then, of course, they can form yogas, favorable yogas, right? They can form Raja yogas, they can form Dhan yogas, they can form Arishta yogas. And Palidipikas, we all saw, classifies them in three major categories. Those major categories would be what? What's one of the categories?
Mahayoga.
Mahayogas, right? And which are typically exchanges between the house lords that are angles, triangles,
and
2
triangles.
or 11, right? And typically those are going to be favorable exchanges, and they're the ones that can form both Raja and Dhan yogas. And so the second category would be
Danya yogas.
Danya yogas, which are defined how? How are Danya yogas defined?
An exchange that includes 6, 8, 12
Correct.
Dushtana houses.
So we have the trick houses, right? 6, 8, and 12. And so any house lords that are exchanging with them, and generally they are viewed as being not good combinations, right? But they can have favorable meanings. Whether they get very unfavorable usually depends upon additional influences, particularly the additional influence of natural malefics. Not surprising, right? And then the last category?
Kahala yoga.
The Kahala yoga
And how are
with the
those?
third lord.
Right, those exchanges not involving 6, 8, and 12 with 3, but all the other house lords with 3, right? And they're, in my experience, they can be mixed, right? But they can also have some very, very favorable meanings, again, depending upon additional factors. All right, so these are the yogas that we're going to be looking at today, and rather randomly, okay? I'm not going to go in any sort of systematic order. But first, I'm going to pull up my program. People can tell me when they see a chart, and it doesn't happen yet, right?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Right. But I think it's going to come up now.
We can see it.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So this is the, let me get the name of the chart and the data in here and see if people recognize this name. Oh, that's not what I wanted. You should probably recognize her, but that's not who I wanted. Just a moment. So does anyone recognize this individual?
Oh,
Yeah. Musician.
Musician.
He's a musician, an
Musician,
Austrian musician.
Austrian composer, actually considered by many as one of the greatest composers of the classical era in classical music. And, he was 19th century. He was extremely prolific. He actually wrote 600 vocal pieces, 7 symphonies, a number of operas, also music for piano and chamber music. And he died at the age of 31. So he was extremely prolific even for his young, short lifespan. So where in this chart do we see the exchange, and how would you characterize this exchange?
It's a 1-9 exchange. So it's 1-9 Raja.
There's a 1-9 exchange between the Lagna Lord Mercury goes to the 9th, and the 9th Lord Saturn goes to the 1st. So this is a 1-9 exchange, which gives both Raja and Dhan yoga. Now, you all heard me talk about in the article that when you see an exchange from the birth Lagna, you want to see the exchange also from the moon and see if it's gives a similar type of result. So what would be the situation here with the Mercury-Saturn exchange from the moon?
1-5.
1-9.
Now it becomes
Sorry,
1-5. So in other words, it falls in a similar category in the sense that it gives both Raja and Dhan Yoga. This is important to see in terms of how the exchange would manifest. Now, Mercury here, is it as the Lagna Lord in the ninth, is it involved in any other yogas of any note?
Gajakesari Yoga.
Saraswati Yoga.
Well, we're going to call it
Yeah.
Kesari.
Raj Yogas.
One thing, one at a time. We're going to call it Kesari Yoga because Jupiter's not in an angle both from the birth Lagna and the moon. But I heard someone say Saraswati Yoga, and this is really important to see that Mercury is involved in a Saraswati, given what we know about this person's life, whose whole life was about, well, actually he became a teacher, but his whole life was about music and musical composition and performance of music. So you see the Saraswati Yoga, not from the birth Lagna, but from the moon, right? And would anyone see Jupiter as having some source of strength here?
It's in Aquarius.
It's in
That's
Aquarius.
where it's exalted.
You've already heard me talk about that. Well, like an exalted planet, all right? And then, who's the planet of music and what source of strength would you see it having here?
So Venus.
Venus,
Venus.
and Venus is
It's
strong
Swa
in
in D9.
In D9, Venus is actually, in this Mula Trikona sign. And then, you can see he was born in Saturn. Saturn's a part of this exchange, 1-9 from the birth line. I'm sorry, he was born in Jupiter, but moved into Saturn at age 4. What's Saturn's source of strength there besides the exchange?
Saturn is exalted in Nomansha.
Exalted in Navamsha. So, we have quite a configuration here. Multiple yogas, planets having sources of strength. And then, of course, you have to see if they run the periods. And of course, he does, because starting at age 4 is when he started running Saturn. And it was actually in Saturn Mercury from age 7 to 10 that he started displaying. We started learning to play music, and he started violin, and he started to exhibit exceptional musical ability. Now, Saturn here, it's involved in the 1-9 exchange, but what other significant yoga is it also involved in? Favorable.
Parvata-like yoga?
Sorry?
Parvata-like yoga?
And why would you say that, Nima?
This positive Lagnesha with Saturn is in an angle, and it's supposed to be exalted or Swa, but it's retrograde. So there's some source of strength.
And, it's exalted in Navamsha, it's involved in exchange. So, it's not exactly the technical definition of Parvata Yoga, but I would agree that it's Parvata-like. I was looking for something additional, though, on a favorable side that Saturn's involved in.
Mark, it's a Virinchi Yoga.
Well, it is Virinchi Yoga because Saturn, Jupiter, and the fifth Lord are all in angles and trines, and they have sources of strength. And he was a religious man. In fact, a good portion of his music was sacred music. So the fact that, this exists in his chart and was activated in the Saturn major period is a relevant point. Thank you for seeing that. I'm seeing something.
Even Srinatha Yoga as well. Ninth
Yes.
Lord Mercury, Venus.
Mercury, Venus, and the ninth Lord are all in angles and trines. So there's Srinatha Yoga as well. Good for people for seeing this. There's something
also a nodal Raja Yoga.
And you would see that how?
Saturn being the lord of a trine in an angle with Rahu.
Good. One more thing about this Saturn in terms of some significant yoga it's involved in we've not yet mentioned.
Both Saturn and Venus aspect, they are trine lords aspecting each other. They both are strong in D9.
And what sort of yoga do they form then?
Trikona Raja Yoga.
Trikona Raja
They form a Trikona Raja Yoga besides a good Dhan Yoga, right? And
And also there's two nodal yogas with Venus and Saturn.
correct. Now, of course, we saw that Saturn's exalted in Navamsha Venus, and so, these are very well qualified yogas. When a person is composing music, which is, of course, a creative act, what house and house lord most comes into play?
Fifth.
Third.
The
Third house.
Third.
the fifth house, fifth lord of creativity, right? And so you see, he starts composing music when he runs Saturn, and it's in this mutual glance with Venus. They have strength, they form this yogas. But then, after Saturn, he moves into Mercury, which you can see from the moon is the fifth lord involved in this 1-5 exchange. So, I already spoke about what an incredibly prolific composer he was. Died quite young, though. Where is the Arishta yoga in his chart? Very unfortunate combination.
The ascendant has malefic, Saturn and Rahu, Mars aspects them, and the Lagnesha is in between two malefics, Mars and the Sun.
Good, Sonali. So she sees that, Saturn, we must remember, for Gemini is not just the ninth lord, but it's also the eighth lord in the first house here. It's with Rahu, so it has that malefic influence, and they additionally get the aspect of Mars, who's not only a malefic, but is also the sixth lord of this birth chart. And then additionally, as Sonali saw, these planets in the ninth, forming good yogas, are also malefically ham, Mars on one side, Sun on the other. And this certainly contributed to him, dying at a rather young age. He, the official cause of his death was given as typhoid fever, but, and I'm not sure why, but a lot of historians think it was actually syphilis, for which he died from. And this was actually in his Mercury moon period, right? Now, typically the Lagna lord, or even a Kendra lord like Mercury as the fourth lord here, is not viewed as being a Maraka giving planet, but in practical experience, you'll see that just about any house lord can be happening when a person passes away, but there's always reasons for that. And then, of course, him passing away in the sub-period of the moon would be rather clear. Why would I say that?
Second
Moon
lord
is the
Maraka.
second lord,
It's
and Jupiter is the seventh lord. All of them are together.
Right. So, Mercury is with a Maraka seventh lord. It's also with a Maraka second lord. And by the way, I mentioned he wrote over 600 compositions for vocalists. And, a lot of this, or most of it was some of it was in Saturn, some of it was in Mercury. Why would, what's a part of this combination here in the ninth house that might say that he was writing a lot of music for vocalists?
Moon, second lord.
Second lord with Mercury.
That's correct. So the house of the voice, or the house of speech, vocalist, is the second house. And so, the moon is part of this combination, involved in the various yogas that we outlined. The sub period when he passed it was Mercury, Moon, Venus. So you see Venus again also playing the role of an afflicted Maraka here, falling as it did in the seventh. It's also interesting to see this, or not interesting, but instructive to see him passing away. From the Gemini point of view, it happened in the major period of Aquarius. Now, where is the combination in his chart that shows Arishta from the Gemini point of view and danger to the body?
Natikaraka place.
GK with the AK.
GK with the AK, and he's running that period. And again, we must remember the hemming, which again becomes, so he's got an AK, which represents him as an individual. It is with Jupiter, but it's also with Mercury, who's the GK. And then, you've got the hemming. The sub-period was Virgo. What strikes you about that?
It get the aspect of the DK Saturn, and it goes 8th from Aquarius.
That's exactly right. See all the malefic influence on Virgo, Mars, Saturn, Rahu, Ketu, also Venus, but mostly heavily afflicted and then the relationship between Aquarius and Virgo is 6-8. This is classic, timing in Gemini. And then from Virgo itself, the AK with the GK and Hemd goes in the 6th house from there. So this period, was obviously very dangerous for his health and brought about his passing. So any additional thoughts or comments about this chart before we move on?
Just one question.
Yeah,
Go
go ahead, Pulak.
Would you consider this as a Shubh Uvachari yoga with the third Lord Sun getting amplified or in focus?
Well, you've got benefics on both sides, right, of the sun. And so, yes, you would. It didn't really get activated in the dasha sequence, at least in terms of a major period, but is this, the sun falling in the 8th house here I don't think he had any younger siblings. I don't know that for sure. Saturn also aspects the 3rd house. 3rd lord goes to the 8th. But because it's got this benefics on both sides, is it a Shubha yoga? The answer is yes.
Thank you.
Now, to me, what's most relevant that way is that when a planet like Mercury, which is a period he did run, when it's involved in some yogas, like we saw that, some success in fame-giving yogas, which Mercury certainly is, if it's also then in a solar yoga, here falling second from the sun, if you read my books on Graha yogas, I talked about in such instances, then that adds additional luster to those yogas that Mercury forms in, and that was certainly the case here. So I'm glad you brought up that point, allowed me to talk about that. Anything else?
Marco, I was thinking of Viparit Raja Yoga, the sambandha of 6, 8, 12, but 8 and 6 have aspect each other.
I'm always been wondering, Nilima, whether those form by connection or whether they form only by placement. What's given in Paladipika is placement, meaning 6th lord in the 8th lord in the 12th, that sort of thing. You may have learned that, by connection.
Penny did teach us sambandha of 6, 8, 12 also. That's what she
No, I
taught us.
know that she taught that, and that may be true, correct. I, tend to go by the book, you might say.
That's true.
And then, go by what's given in the Shastra. Again, it may be correct. I just can't say it. Quite frankly, I never researched that. Certainly when they all connect in a house, as you know, that's a full Viparit Raja Yoga, when all the trick house lords are in a trick house connected, and only those trick house lords. All right, anything else here before we move on?
Margaret, would you consider that writing musical compositions is a 3rd house thing? It's a short story, so to speak.
That's an interesting question.
And if so, then that's sun with the Shubhacharya
It has some
condition.
significance that way. Yes, and I'd have to sort of research that to know for sure. What I do know is that if you look at the charts of people who usually successful musical composers, a strong 5th house, 5th lord's involved. And it's involved when they're doing this. It is, you might say, a shorter type of writing. And so, the 3rd house, 3rd lord. But Mercury, of course, is the natural karak of that. And again, a lot of his composition came in Mercury. Anyway, we are going, one more thing I want to mention about his death in Mercury major period. Whose nakshatra is it in?
Rahu.
Yeah, and so what you're really, picking up there through this thing that I call Udu's clues, you're picking up the real, badly afflicted Lagna, right? Rahu, Saturn, Mars. Mars is the 6th
Mark,
lord. Saturn is the 8th lord.
Mark, would you say, sorry,
Go ahead, Nilima.
would you say the 8th lord in the Lagna also contributes to?
Well, yes, this is what I was saying, because Saturn's not only just the 9th lord, it's the 8th lord.
Yeah.
So it's a 1-8 combination with additional malefic influence. This is the very definition of a Rishta yoga, or an Ava yoga, as you would say, right?
Thank you.
All right, so lots of good questions, but we're going to move on. So this was the 1-9 exchange, which of course is one of the Mahayogas. I want to pull up the chart here of this person. People recognize the name Glenn Close?
Yes.
So usually successful actress, movie star. Her career spanned 5 decades. She, one of the few winners of what's called the Triple Crown of acting. She, got Emmy Awards, which is for TV appearance. She got Tony Awards for stage theatrical appearances, and of course, Academy Awards. She was nominated like 8 times. So usually successful performing artist. And where in her chart do you see a combination I've referred to many times in the charts of movie stars that can make you a successful professional performer?
This is a 1-8 exchange.
Well, I didn't ask about
Conjunction
the
of the
exchange.
third and the 10th lords.
So who's the Yogacara? Think about who the Yogacaraka is for Cancer. Of course, it's Mars, 10th and 5th Lord, right? And then, who's the third Lord? It would be Mercury. So you have that 3-10 combination, but then they're joined by the Lagna Lord Moon. We'll get to the exchange in a moment. And most of you should realize that for Cancer Lagna, the combination of the Moon and Mars is one of the best Raja Yogas you can have. The Moon only was the first, both an angle and a trine. Saturn is the Yogacaraka 5th and 10th house. Now, all these planets are, happening in the 8th house, and we'll get to that in a moment. But I want people to see here the combination in your chart that shows the potential for being such a successful award-winning actresses. And then additionally, what is the Moon involved in?
Kesari Yoga.
In Kesari Yoga.
It's involved in Kesari Yoga here. Moon is, use the Moon as a log in Aquarius, and Jupiter falls in an angle, falls 10th from there. And it was actually in her Jupiter major period, just after moving into the Jupiter major period, that she first, her career in theater first began. And I want to say something about, and then so she went on to great success. One of her Oscar nominations for Best Actress in the movie The Big Chill or something like that, I forget what it was, happened in the Jupiter, towards the end of the Jupiter major period. See Jupiter in D10, and then look at the degree of the Lagna. This is something that, I always do when I'm using D10. I look at the degree of the Lagna. I want to see I want to see how close to the edge between Dashamsha, 2 different Dashamshas, it is. So what's the dividing line between the 6th and the 7th Dashamsha? Can anyone tell me?
18 degrees.
18 degrees. So this means that if you were to back up the birth time just like 2 minutes, falling below 18, the Dashamsha Lagna would not be Virgo. It would be Leo, in which I suspect, actually strongly suspect, that is actually the case, given her initial stardom in her Jupiter major period, and Jupiter Rahu in particular. Of course, they're connected in the birth chart, but then Rahu would not fall 8th from the Lagna of the Dashamsha. It would fall in the 9th with the benefic Venus. Actually, she had 3 years in a row, 82, 83, and 84, where she appeared in movies where she was nominated for Best Supportive Actress. Didn't win, but obviously it was quite a series of years for her in terms of sort of success that way. Now, coming back to the exchange, right? So this is obviously not a favorable exchange, right? It's 1-8. Of course, it again gives a source of strength for both planets. Now, she had even greater success in her Saturn major period, right? And well, we're going to talk about that in a moment, but what sort of favorable yoga does Saturn give? And or why does yoga, in what way does Saturn give Raja Yoga? Let me ask that.
Is getting the aspect of Jupiter.
Well, how does it give Raja Yoga is what I'm asking.
The ninth Lord
It's
Jupiter
the
is
seventh lord in the Lagna.
Yeah,
yes.
it's just like Indira Gandhi, it's not the exchange between the Moon and Saturn, but it's the seventh Lord and the first. We always have to remember that the Lagna is both an angle and a trine. So when you have an angle Lord falling in the Lagna, then this gives Raja Yoga. Just look at the chart of George W. Bush when he became president, same sort of situation. Of course, it gets the influence of an additional natural benefic, right? Two of them, right? Gets the aspect of Jupiter and gets the aspect of Venus. Now, if we made the Dashamsha Lagna Leo, Saturn would fall in not the 10th, it would fall in the 11th, still a good placement there, right? But one thing I want to go, before I go there, I wanted to highlight Jupiter Moon marked a very successful period for her. And this is obviously quite predictable based on the activation of the Gajikesari Yoga in the birth chart, but see that the Gajikesari Yoga repeats in Dashamsha. You all have heard me talk about this. When this is the case and the person runs such periods, then you see some pretty dramatic results. And if Leo is indeed the Lagna of Dashamsha, I feel it probably is, then this is along the 1-7 axis. Moon here would be Vargotama, relevant to D10, and Jupiter, if it appeared in the Lagna of D10, would of course be getting directional strength. But what other source of strength does Jupiter have here?
It's in an exchange with Sun.
It's in the exchange with Sun. We never want to miss exchanges. I didn't emphasize this in the article, but we don't want to miss exchanges in the divisional charts as well. They also produce a source of strength for the planets and can form yogas in my experience. But some of you may remember a movie which she's quite famous for called Fatal Attraction, where she essentially plays a very emotionally disturbed individual. Excuse me, I got a tickle in my throat. Very emotionally disturbed individual. And she talked about how when she was in this role and playing this role, she herself felt that she became sort of temporarily kind of psychotic or, emotionally deranged. And the reason I mention this is because this took place in the Saturn-Mercury period and subperiod. Of course, the Mercury is giving her the acting, but, this exchange between Moon and the 1-8 exchange here, particularly involving the Moon, of course, which is the Manas, has to do with the mental emotional makeup. The exchange here, 1-8 with Saturn, I have a chart of a psychiatric patient who very frequently would go psychotic with the exact same combination for cancer. So I always found it kind of interesting. You've all heard me say that actors and actresses get drawn to certain roles because of, it represents certain aspects of themselves as reflected in their birth charts. And you would see that in here. But, she ran the consecutive dashas of Jupiter, Saturn, Mercury, and as I said, she had this long and distinguished career that has lasted over 5 decades, right? And so any thoughts or questions about this particular example before we move on?
Regarding the Dashamsha, if her Saturn was in 11th house, are there any restrictive personal friends that would prove that? What were her friendships like?
Well, you wouldn't judge that based on D10, or I wouldn't. So I'm not sure why.
I'm just asking.
Yeah. Well, my answer would be I wouldn't judge that based on D10. What I see is that it's in the 11th house of awards, if it's Leo Lagna, and in which case, she was very award-winning during the Saturn major period. Okay, because I have a lot.
Just one more point. It's a brief point. Yeah, she did Fatal Attraction in Mercury, in Saturn Mercury, you said.
I believe so, yeah, 97.
And if that's the case, then Mercury is the impressionable 12th lord and gives the results of that Moon-Saturn exchange. And also with Mars there, which is the Yogacaraka, that would have given her the fame and everything else that was with it. So I think that, Mercury would play that role.
Yes. I wonder if I have that timing right. I'd have to go back and look at this. Yeah, I have to go. No, I'm pretty sure it was. No, it was Saturn Mercury. That's correct. But thank you for that point. All right, I am going to move on here. Now, one of the things you heard me talk about in the article is that exchanges in a chart can take on a very new and different meaning from Dasha Lagna. And you may recall, I used the chart of LeBron James. You know, he has that 6-9 exchange, which was very unfortunate in terms of his experiences with his biological father, who basically wasn't a father at all. But when he then ran Aquarius and the exchange between Mars and Saturn becomes 110, it very much contributed to his incredible success and, his incredible success and status. It becomes a 110 Raja Yoga, and that definitely contributed to what that, the Venus period brought, if you guys remember that chart. But now I want to pull up the chart of former U.S. President Richard Nixon. And again, find the exchange here. All right, you see the chart here. Where's the exchange?
Jupiter, Venus? No.
Saturn, Venus.
It's Saturn,
Saturn.
Venus, right? It's Saturn, Venus. And it's an exchange between 7 and 10. And there, it's two planets in angles, okay, and ruling angle houses. But the exchange by itself does not, produce like a Raj Yoga or anything, right?
Mark, from the Chandra Lagna it does.
No, from Chandra Lagna it does, right? What kind of exchange does it become from Chandra Lagna?
Venus becomes the Yoga Karaka and Saturn has.
Yeah, Venus becomes a yoga card. The exchange itself is 2-5, which is, of course, a done yoga, right? But what I'm getting at is that he became vice president. He was the vice president of the U.S. and then nearly won the 1960 election against Kennedy. It was one of the closest elections in U.S. history. Some say he might have been cheated out of the election. Some shenanigans going on with some of the precincts in the Chicago area in the state of Illinois, a key swing state at that time. But then later in the Saturn major period, he did become president. Now look at this exchange using Taurus as a Lagna, as a Dasha Lagna. What does the exchange now become?
110.
Becomes 110. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. And of course, Saturn's additional source of strength there, besides the exchange, is what?
It's Swa in Navamsha.
Swa in Navamsha. And it was exactly in Saturn Venus that he became the Republican nominee in the 1960 election. Now, he didn't win, but even becoming the nominee, and again, it was a very close election. He came close to the White House. Let me just say that in Saturn Venus. And really, in order to be able to see why that period and sub-period gives that result, you really have to see the exchange from Dasha Lagna, where it becomes, a really powerful 110 exchange with planets in strength, particularly the major period of Saturn. Then later in the Saturn-Jupiter period and sub-period is when he actually won the presidency finally, right? So Saturn gave him the vice presidency, gave him the Republican nomination in the 60 election, and then eventually gave him president. And, really have to see, of course, it brought a fall, which Saturn in the 10th house can always bring, but that didn't happen in the Saturn major period. So really, the main purpose in wanting to show this example is just to highlight the importance of when you have an exchange in this chart. It can even be an unfavorable exchange, like the Saturn and Mars exchange in the chart of basketball star LeBron James. But then when you run a period and the exchange then becomes something else, you have to see what it becomes, but you'll find in my experience that it will give that result. So any comment or question about this example before we move on?
Mark, I'm just interested in why in the Saturn-Venus period, in that 110 exchange, why he didn't win. Why we could predict a
Right.
win for that.
Right, and you couldn't judge that based on his chart. You'd have to see the person he competed against, right? You know, when you have two nominees for Academy Awards or two nominees for like the presidency, they're both going to be running very good periods. Why? Because they're the nominee, right? But as to who wins, that's a contest between the two and who's got the karma that way. And Kennedy was running the better period, slightly. Really, that's the only way I can answer that question.
It'd be interesting to see the Dashamsha, or at least looking at the Navamsha. Venus is in the 12th house from Saturn, which is the house of loss. Maybe that had something we could have looked at.
Possibly. You know, what's happening interestingly in the Dashamsha, and this again makes a point, is the Dashamsha Lagna correct? Again, look, 24 degrees. That's the dividing line between the 8th and the 9th Dashamsha, right? So, you know, it could be other than Aries, but regardless, you've all heard me say, when two planets are strongly sambandha in any divisional chart, and they have a good promise in the birth chart, that you run that period and sub-period, and it's going to bring significant developments related to whatever area of life that Varga represents, in this case, career. Now look at Saturn, Venus. Saturn's in its own sign, Venus in its own sign, which again supports why that period was so strong for him in terms of his political success, although he fell short. But then he runs Saturn, you know, Jupiter, right? Period and sub-period of two planets that are in their own sign. Again, is this the correct D10 Lagna? Probably not, given their placement here, although I can't say that for sure. But what I can say is that the period and sub-period of two planets in their own sign, and he gets the presidency in Saturn, Jupiter.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, we're going to move on here. So let me bring up this chart. If you don't recognize the name Adele, she's one of the most successful recording artists in the modern era. And her success came at a very, very young age. Where is the exchange in her chart? And what sort of yoga, if any, does it give?
Venus, Mercury,
And what kind of exchange is it?
4-5 exchange.
It's a 4-5 Raja Yoga giving exchange, right? Of course, it immediately makes both planets strong. Venus, of course, is the Yogacaraka planet, besides being involved in this 4-5 exchange. If you look down in Navamsha, you will see that Venus has this additional source of strength because it's in its Mula Trikona sign there. And you can see that she ran the 20-year Venus period, starting at age 7. It took her up to age 27. And of course, this is when it all unfolded. It all happened for her. She became this, you know, superstar recording artist. Now, in what way is Venus informed in any other yoga that would make its potential for giving Raja Yoga results great success? Do you see any other way in which that's the case?
Obviously, Chandra
1-9.
Adi Yoga. Chandra Adi Yoga.
1-9.
Yes, see the Chandra Adi Yoga. With the moon here, it's not in a particularly good condition. It's in its debilitation sign, and it's Gandanta, but, you know, she has Jupiter in the 6th, Mercury in the 7th, Venus in the 8th, and all the planets involved have sources of strength. What's, well, first of all, in the birth chart, what is Jupiter's dignity? Can anyone say?
In the sign of a great friend.
In the sign of a great friend, good, Peter. And then in Navamsha, what do we see?
Exchange with Mercury.
Exchange with Mercury, canceling Mercury's debility. So Mercury has the exchange, giving it a source of strength, and then it's got the exchange in Navamsha. Of course, we just talked about Venus. It's got the exchange, and then it's in Mula Trikona sign. So all components of the Chandradi Yoga are strong, and she's running one of the components when she ran Venus. One more reason that Venus is very yogic giving.
9th Lord is in 5th.
Yes, what else?
In Raja Yoga with Saturn.
1-9 Raja.
One of the best Raja yogas for Capricorn happens when Venus, Yogacaraka 10th and Yogacaraka 4th and 9th Lord is in a mutual glance with Saturn, who's the first Lord, right? 1-4, 1-9. So, this is the way in which it was predictable that, Venus could give spectacular results in terms of, her musical career. Right? But I've asked people to see the exchange from the moon, not just from the birth lagna, in which case, what does the exchange become with the additional influence of Saturn on Venus?
7-8.
Sorry?
7-8.
7-8.
Becomes some 7/8, and then Venus, as the 7th Lord, gets the aspect of Saturn. What kind of yoga does this form?
Duskriti yoga.
Which can lead to
Unhappy marriage.
and divorce, which is what happened to her in her Venus major period. Right? Of course, the 7th house has the influence of the Rahu Ketu axis, and who else? Who else aspects her 7th house?
Saturn. Sorry, 7th house.
7th house. Who else? What malefic, strong malefic aspects?
Mars.
Mars, right?
Mars aspect.
And if you take a K and Rao principle that you've already talked about, when planets are retrograde, they should be understood as being aspected from the previous sign, in which case you could take that principle with Saturn aspecting from Scorpio. Saturn would also be influencing the 7th house. Either without that, though, you've got the Rahu Ketu axis and the aspect of Mars. You've also got the aspect of Jupiter, though. It's not a wholly problematic picture, but Venus did bring a marriage, but it also brought an unhappy marriage that ended in divorce. The exchange becomes 7/8 from the moon with Saturn afflicting. And then Saturn-Venus contacts in particular can give problems in love relationships, right? Yeah, okay. Any other thoughts and comments about this chart before we move on?
As per Gemini, I think Saturn is expecting Venus, right? That is
Well, if we're doing the Gemini system, the DK Venus, again, they form a Gemini Raja Yoga, DK, PK, but, in my articles about the DK, I've indicated that when the DK is under malefic influence, again, this can be like the Gemini equivalent of a Duskriti Yoga. All right. So anything else before we move on here? I want to get
Yes,
into, sorry?
yeah, Shankar Yoga. Sorry.
Well, why don't you define that, Neelamani?
Well, here the Shankar Yoga, the Lagna Lord is strong. So Saturn has retrogression. That's the source of strength. And the 5th and the 6th Lord are in mutual kendra. So Mercury and Moon are in mutual kendra. So
Very
shows
good.
again music.
Very good. That would not be a yoga that would be typically easily identified in this chart, but you're correct. All right. Now I want to emphasize again, seeing exchanges from Dasha Lagna and how they will interpretively be very significant when you do that. I'm pulling up this chart here. Anyone recognize his name? The Indians should recognize his name.
Tennis.
yes, Grandmaster.
So chess champion, right? In fact, he was the youngest grandmaster from India of all time. And he was the reigning champ for a few years before he got dethroned by Magnus Carlsen. But, hugely successful chess champion, right? Where is the exchange in his chart?
Saturn, Mars.
It's
to,
Saturn Mars, right? So Saturn, actually goes to its debilitation sign. But, you've all heard me say that the most effective form of cancellation is as a result of the exchange. And now from the birth lagna, what does the exchange become? What kind of exchange?
2-4.
It's
2-4.
2-4, right? It's 2-4. Now now see it from the moon. What kind of exchange does it become from the moon?
3-5.
3-5.
Which house and house lord most pertains to games and playing games competitively or not, or sports? Which house lord related to that?
6.
3.
Third house, third lord, right? So if you look at the dasha sequence as to when he became the reigning chess champion, which I believe was first in year 2000, and then he held the title for a period of time. It was in his Mars period, but now use Aquarius, the position of Mars, as a dasha lagna. What happens to the exchange?
1-3.
1-3.
It becomes 1-3. And then, of course, Mars is with Rahu, also getting the aspect of who?
Jupiter.
In the aspect of Jupiter. And
There's nodal Raj Yoga.
right. But, what I'm saying is that, it's more predictable that he would become. Now, from the moon, that, Mars is in the third house, right? With Rahu aspected by Jupiter. But when he runs Mars and then Rahu, now this exchange becomes 1-3, and he's, basically spending his life playing chess competitively, professionally, earning well, being a chess champion for at least a couple of years. And then again in 2007, right, look at that, Rahu Saturn, right? Look at that, Rahu Saturn. And again, this is predictable. How? It's predictable, primarily based on, you could see it from the moon, but really mostly on the basis of dasha lagna. This is why I'm emphasizing the importance, as I did in the chart of Richard Nixon, of seeing what the exchange becomes when you run the period of one of the planets involved in the exchange, right? Questions about that?
Would you consider Rahu owning Aquarius exchange also, or just Mars?
Well, in the Parashari system, we're not using dual lordships like we're in the Gemini system. What I would see is that, all these planets have sources of strength. Mars and Saturn, because of the exchange, you would also say because Saturn's retrograde, but also Rahu being in its what's considered its own sign, which would be Aquarius, right? So this is my point.
Mark, the exchanges we see from dasha lagna, presumably it's just a temporary source of strength. Once that period is over, would we expect to see that sort of success start to fade?
Well, I mean, in terms of what result, the planets are going to be strong regardless, always, right? Because of the exchange. Now, what house lords are exchanging, and therefore what result they're giving, will be temporary from dasha lagna, if that's what you're asking.
Yes, exactly.
But, temporary here is 7 years of Mars followed by 18 years of Rahu.
Pretty permanently temporary.
Yeah. So it's fascinating that, the way this plays out. Again, you've heard me say it, but it's worth repeating. If you look at the chapter in Parashara Hora on the results of dashas, and it's talking about periods and subperiods, what's always being emphasized is where the subperiod lord is falling from the major period lord, which is, in other words, dasha lagna. Okay, so I'm going to move on here.
One question, Mark. Like
Yes.
for winning the competitions, normally we are saying for 6th house and 10th house, right? So is there any connection we can see that maybe he's become champion or?
Well, you know, just use Mars's and Rahu's position in Aquarius as a Dasha Lagna, right?
Mhm.
Who becomes the 10th Lord?
Venus.
No, who
No,
becomes
okay, from Dasha.
Mars.
Mars.
Mars, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then it would be forming a nodal Raja with Rahu. It's the 10th Lord in the first from there, but then look what happens to the 10th house itself. Now you have Venus, the Yogacaraka planet, right?
Right.
And then you have the sun, and look at the Shubha Upacharya Yoga that happens to the 10th house from there.
Right.
You see?
Yes.
Then it becomes clear.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks.
We're going to move on here. Where to go next? Well, you know, I've shown a number of, you know, famous people examples. I want to maybe shift over now and show some examples from the charts of, you know, just from my own case files, right? So I'm going to remove this here. And this person did give me permission to use the chart. And it's instructive, as I'll talk about. Again, in terms of seeing exchanges, not just from the perspective of the birth chart, but from alternative lagnas as well, particularly out of the moon, of course, what we've been talking about, Dasha Lagna. So where's the exchange here?
Four, 8.
4-8.
Saturn, Mercury. Yeah.
Now Saturn and Mercury exchanging, and of course that's one of the Danya yogas. But you know, I always like to look at any kind of combination in a chart, including such an exchange, and ask myself the question: what favorable result could it give? Here we have Saturn as the 4th Lord in the 8th, and in an exchange with the 8th Lord. 8th Lord Mercury goes to the 4th. 4-8 exchange. What favorable result could that give, and could it give it in the Saturn major period, which the person is currently in, runs up to 2034?
It's be an inheritance.
An inheritance that is including what?
Property.
A home, house,
Right.
property.
4-8 combination with the planets in strength is a combination for inheriting property, which this person in her Saturn major period will happen. But now let's look at this exchange from a different point of view. Which part of the human anatomy does the 4th house, 4th Lord pertain to? One of the things that it pertains to.
Chest, heart, lungs.
Chest, heart, lungs, right? Chest, heart, lungs. And you can see that back in 2015, this person moved into the Saturn Ketu period, which graha relates to viruses, microorganisms, viruses.
Ketu.
Ketu. So you see here, Saturn is in a 4 exchange, ruling the lungs. 4th Lord goes to the 8th house with Ketu. When this person is a world traveler. In fact, that's her hobby. She goes on these trips all over the world. And in moving into Saturn, she went to Iceland, where, and this was pre-COVID, but it appears that she got some sort of viral infection, not unlike COVID, that really affected her lungs. And actually it became something of a life-threatening sort of situation. And so you can see this as a reflection also of the, maybe the unfavorable potentials related to a 4-8 exchange. But she, of course, she survived. Now, the point about this exchange, though, is I want you to see it from a strong Chandra Lagna, what kind of exchange, what kind of planet does Saturn become? What kind of exchange is it from there?
210.
So Saturn becomes the Yogacaraka, ninth and 10th Lord, goes to the second in an exchange with the second Lord. So that's what kind of exchange is Saturn-Mercury? I mean, Saturn's going to give Raja Yoga just because it's a standalone Yogacaraka, but that specific exchange becomes what kind of an exchange?
And yoga. And yoga.
Becomes two. It becomes a
210.
it becomes a done yoga giving exchange, right?
Well, from Dasha
Saturn,
Lagna, it's a
Saturn is the
1-9.
ninth lord in the second, right? In an exchange with the second lord, right? It's not a 9-2 exchange from there. It's a 2-10 exchange, right? But it involves Saturn as the ninth lord, Mercury as the second and the fifth lord. Right. So much to this person's surprise, I told him that I thought this, I knew that this person owned a business and a successful one. And, I indicated to her that I thought one of the positive potentials of the Saturn major period is that she would have good business success during this time with the usual ups and downs that, any business owner experiences. And that Saturn in particular would be good financially, and the Saturn K2 period and sub-period would be particularly good financially. This was rather surprising to her that Saturn K2 could give good result, but in fact it did. Really good period for her financially. And what I was doing here is seeing it from, you couldn't get that interpretation from the birth lagna. You could only get that interpretation from Chandra lagna. But now look at what the exchange becomes from Dasha lagna.
It's a 1-9 exchange.
1-9 exchange. Now, Rasho Hora tells us that when we know something about the person and their background, we can predict more accurately because we can fit what the yoga or the periods are giving to what we know about the person. What I knew about this person is that they love to travel. It was their main sort of form of recreation, their main avocation. They're a photographer and they like to, go on these trips and do a lot of photographic. So I told her that, in this period, this would even be more so than it had been in the past. And in particularly in what sub-period, of course, Saturn-Mercury, which ran from 2018 to 2021. And again, this turned out to be correct. So it's a good example, I think, of the importance of, seeing any exchange from these three perspectives, because they will give their result from all three perspectives. Here, it's a favorable exchange, or rather unfavorable exchange from the birth lagna, but a favorable one from both the moon and from Dasha lagna. Any questions about this before we move on?
One, Mark. We always tend to look at the chart from Chandra lagna if it's a powerful Chandra. If the moon is weak, would we still want to look at the chart from there?
Yes. So the Shastra is very clear about this, that, the chart should be interpreted, all yoga should be interpreted from Chandra lagna. Doesn't put any qualifier about that in terms of some condition of the moon for us to be doing that. Now, but I believe that when you have a particularly strong moon, as you do here, then, the perspective from Dasha lagna becomes, from the moon, from Chandra lagna, becomes especially significant and will give especially its results from there. But always, regardless of the condition of the moon, it can be debilitated, it can be, dark. You still want to see things from Chandra lagna. As we did in the case of Adele, who had the Chandra Adiyoga from a moon that's Gandanta in its debilitation sign.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else before we go on here? So another example, this was actually sent to me by a student who's in this program here, gets the articles. And I was grateful for them to give me this example. And so again, the question is, when I pull this chart up, if you can identify the exchange, and how would you characterize the exchange?
Mars, Mercury.
Mars and Mercury exchange. And now, again, I want to highlight that any exchange doesn't just connect house lords, it connects the grahas. And so, to me, this exchange of Mars-Mercury is very similar in terms of its effect on both planets, as if Mars and Mercury were conjunct, which, it can give you good logic. Mars is a planet of logic, Mercury was the booty or the intellect, so you can be a persuasive speaker, all right? You have logic, you can communicate force, all things you might consider in terms of some positive sides of having a Mars-Mercury combination. But here, of course, it is a 4-6 exchange. And is there any additional influence on Mercury here?
Jupiter aspect.
Saturn and Jupiter.
Saturn.
It gets a mixed aspect, right? We have Saturn aspecting, of course, Jupiter's aspecting as well as its exaltation sign, but also retrograde. So Mercury as the first lord in the 6th, in an exchange with the 6th lord aspected by Saturn. And what could this, what kind of yoga would this form, and what could it mean at times during the Mercury major period?
An Arista yoga.
It could give some Arista quality. There may be some potential for health issues, coming up during this time. And I believe they did. He's actually past this period. This period, Mercury, Saturn in particular, ran from 2016 to 2018. I don't think there were anything overly significant. Jupiter does even retrograde here, though it's quite strong, does seem to have provided some protection. Venus as a good planet for this Lagna, aspecting the Lagna and then being a beneficent Kendra, helps protect the health as well. But then let's focus on the 4-6 exchange. What are some, you might say, unfavorable potentials that could get expressed in such an exchange?
Could have some
Litigation.
Sorry?
Accidents, 4-6 exchange.
Well, there could be some potential for vehicular accidents with the 4-6 exchange, particularly with the additional aspect of Saturn. I don't know that there have been, but it does show some potential that way. What else? What
Loan for a house?
Sorry?
Loans for a house?
Say it one more time. I didn't hear it.
Home loans, like getting into debt for buying, purchasing home.
Oh, I see. So you've got the house of debts, which is the 6th house in your house. And, that could be, of course, whenever you buy a house with a mortgage, you take on a debt, right? Whether then that becomes some sort of, problematic sort of thing would be more indicative of the exchange.
Mother's health.
Yeah,
Mother,
so,
that's it.
relationship with mother. And, I talked about this in the article in terms of 6-9 exchanges and also 4-6 exchanges. This person, very candidly admitted that they have had an antagonistic relationship with their mother. They even characterized it, I think, somewhat jokingly as love-hate. Now, they're not estranged from each other or anything, but he just described the relationship in that way, and you can see that as an expression of this 4-6 exchange. With the Mars-Mercury, Mercury is also, the Lagna Lord, he says that he's someone who is quick to anger, but that then it goes away quickly. And in general, his personality is not an angry personality, but he says he does flare up quickly, but then that quickly sort of goes away to, which I think can also be an expression of this Mars-Mercury conjunction in this particular exchange, right? So, I thank this individual for willing to share and provide this example.
So
Okay.
Mark,
question.
just one question. Yeah, go ahead, Dhruv. I think is it Dhruv?
I'm sorry, Bulak, go ahead.
I'm
Yeah,
just
so
curious, how would you place the role of Sun here as the 3rd lord in this exchange? Were they self-employed or
No, they've been in, positions, they've been an employee in company, they've done well in their career, although they've had some, real ups and downs in, positions going out from underneath them. Now, but, so we have the sun, and I don't know anything about the relationships or if he even has younger siblings, right? Because you've got the third lord here, just a moment, Nilima, you've got the third lord here in the sixth, right? And it's involved in this exchange. And again, really the big thing is this aspect of Saturn, both on the third lord sun and on the third house itself. But I just don't have any information about whether he has younger siblings, and if so, what's the relationship been like?
Sure. Thank you, Mark.
Sure. Nilima, I saw you raised your hand.
Yeah, this person has Amala Yoga, such a pure Amala Yoga from the moon. There's a benefic in the 10th house with no malefic influence.
So she's referring to the fact that, Amala Yoga is defined from both the birth lagna and from the moon, and it is defined by when there's a natural benefic falling in the 10th from either the birth lagna or the moon, and it shouldn't have any malefic influence, should be unblemished. Amala Yoga, of course, Amala means stainless, right? And it can therefore refer to someone with a stainless reputation, right? One gets a stainless reputation because one engages in positive acts, does good in the world. And, the problem with this, there's no problem here. This is also Kesari Yoga. But you can see that this person was born in the Jupiter major period, and they did get this result, and they got it in the first 15 years of life, though, right? When they're still, very much growing up, they're, up till mid-adolescence, right? But yes, if you're asking me, does the moon and Jupiter here form Amala Yoga? Yes, which of course is also forming a Kesari Yoga. Okay, anything else before we go on here?
Yeah, one question, Mark. Like 4 and 6 exchange, actually, we talked about the relationship with mother. So in that case, if suppose it is related with the benefics, like the exchange between the Jupiter and the Venus, so will it be the same or it will be some different?
Oh, you're talking about, so for a different lagna, if the exchange is between Jupiter and Venus, is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Well, of course, you always have to consider the natural, what kind of planets these are in terms of natural benefics or malefics. So, you could say that, with the benefics involved, it might be less of a problematic exchange. But again, so much depends. It's hard to answer questions like that because so much depends on additional influences. If that exchange, is 4-6 between Jupiter and Venus, and then there's a lot of additional malefic influence, well then, that's going to color what kind of expression that combination has. This is why my students hear me say all the time, stay away from single factor analyses. Don't make judgments based on just a simple single factor. You have to look at the whole picture, particularly additional influences here. The problem with this particular Mercury being in a 4-6 exchange is that there's the additional aspect of Saturn, right? But then, of course, also Jupiter. So, both sides.
Also, I think you've got to take into account whether or not they're planetary friends or planetary enemies.
Good, Peter. But you're right. And so, of course, Venus and Jupiter are, not friends, right? But, since you brought up that exchange, and now it's not the kind of exchange we talked about here, let me bring up this chart that I was asked to give input about just recently. And since you talked about the Venus-Jupiter exchanges. And really, this helps me answer a question you asked, Peter, as well. So where's the exchange here?
11, Venus-Jupiter.
It's Venus-Jupiter, right? Which is going to put Venus in its exaltation sign, number one, and then giving Jupiter, besides the exchange, also what source of strength based on its placement here.
Big Bala.
Getting directional strength. Jupiter is involved also in what the exchange is 1/11, so that of course is a done yoga. And then, now, Peter, you talked about, do we look at the condition of the moon when we see how much a planet's going to give its results from Chandra Lagna? It's always going to give its results from Chandra Lagna, in my experience. Here we have a moon. Now, this is a waning moon, although still more than half bright, but it's also not a good lordship for this Lagna. It's in its debilitation sign, although there's cancellation. It gets the aspect by its sign, Lord Mars, under the influence of the Rahu Ketu axis, but also forming a Gajikesari Yoga with Jupiter. So you have a lot of different things to consider there, different conditions. But the reason I want to emphasize how, planets will give the results from there, she had 2 children. You can see that at age 30, this person moved into their Venus major period, and she had both children in her Venus major period. One was Venus-Venus, and the next one was Venus-Rahu. So how do you predict children from the Venus major period?
It aspects the 5th house, and it's with the 5th lord.
In exchange with the 5th lord. And then think about the subperiod of Rahu, Venus Rahu. Well, of course, whose results Rahu is going to give? It's going to give Venus's results, the 5th lord, in the 5th house of the moon. It's going to give Jupiter's results, the 5th lord, and with Jupiter, natural Karaka. Very predictable, but predictable really on the basis of Chandra Lagna more than anything else, that Venus is going to give children, and particularly Venus and Venus-Jupiter. Also, see whose nakshatra Venus is in.
Jupiter.
Sorry?
Jupiter's
nakshatra, right? So, Venus gives results from the moon here, despite the moon's has some, actually, I didn't even mention, it gets aspected both by Saturn and Mars, right? Which, of course, moon here and the influence of Rahu Ketu axis, aspected by Saturn, aspected by Mars, it's in the 7th house. What would you probably think is going to be some experience that she would have in her life as a result of this? Jupiter's actually the 8th lord here. What could be one result? What could be one result of this?
Divorce.
Yeah, one marriage broke. One marriage broke. One marriage broke. But although I understand the second marriage has endured. Okay, so let's see here. Going on. I'm going to go back to some celebrity examples here. And again, the importance of seeing things from the different perspectives. This is obviously a big theme of mine here. I'm pulling up the chart of major movie star Stephen McQueen. Again, find the exchange.
It's Jupiter again.
Venus-Jupiter, yeah.
Venus-Jupiter, but now from the birth logna, what exchange do they form?
9/11.
Excuse me?
9/11.
Giving what sort of yoga result?
Dana Yoga?
Obviously a very good done yoga. And why? Because Jupiter's the strongest trine lord, 9th lord in the 11th, and then Venus is an exalted 11th lord. Not really that close to its highest degree of exaltation, but really only maybe 5 degrees away and applying. So quite an exalted Venus. There's no question of combustion there, right? Because the sun is far enough away. And of course, because the sun is the 2nd lord with the 11th lord in the 9th, that's additional done yoga. And so when he ran Jupiter Venus, quite predictably, yoga show what, dasha show when, he was the highest paid actor in Hollywood. He was getting $5 million a picture, which at that time was, this was back in from 73 to 76. So, in today's dollars, he'd probably be getting like, 20 million or more per picture. Obviously, a really exceptional non-yoga result from that. But of course, this is coming as a result of his acting, right? And what does the exchange become from Dasha Lagna?
1-3.
Well, actually, from Dasha Lagna,
Sorry.
from Dasha Lagna, it becomes
111.
111, another Daniel. From the moon, what house does Venus fall and what house does Jupiter rule?
3-5.
Right. So Venus now becomes the Yogacaraka planet in the third house of the performing arts, and Jupiter is the third lord of the performing arts from the moon. Right. So again, this is how it could be seen that that exchange is expressing itself from all three perspectives.
Mark, can I make a point on this briefly? I'm just wondering if you would like to comment a little bit on the other houses that the planets rule in an exchange, because in this one in particular, we see Venus as fourth lord, Jupiter as sixth lord, and of course, Steve McQueen also used to race cars.
Right, and so Karaka Venus, right? Karaka Venus is the Karaka of vehicles, right? And he was very much involved in racing, and then racing is a sport, right? So again, you get the expression, the third house type of expression. But you see that again. Well, Mercury obviously is the third lord here. It's part of with Venus and so forth. But again, you kind of see that more from the moon, where Jupiter this was happening in Jupiter. Jupiter rules the third from there. Venus is in the third house from there. He's racing these very high-end, very expensive race cars. But yeah, that was a part of what was going on during that time, and this is the way it can be seen. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Anything else before we move on here? Okay. So just we're going to go back to just recently again, I was asked to give input about this chart. Of course, if there's more than one exchange in a chart, that's something to see. And you'll see that with this chart here. Actually, I'm pulling up the chart of an individual whose birth I predicted 21 years ago. So 21 years ago, this young Indian couple here now was living in the US, living in the San Diego area, and they came to me. They were having trouble conceiving, but I, selected a time, and it actually turned out to be in the rather near future from when they talked to me about when I thought they could give birth, and I predicted a birth in the early spring of 2003, and this was the child that was born to them then. Who's now, as you can look down at the Dasha sequence, he's now, 20, going on 21. He's a junior. So what's happening at that time of life? Typically, he's involved in higher education. He's in college. He's junior this year. And where are the exchanges in his chart?
Moon, Jupiter, Saturn, Venus.
So the Moon and Jupiter exchange, and what would be considered particularly good about that exchange, obviously the Moon here could not be more Amavasya, right? It's quite Amavasya, but it's in Jupiter's sign, aspected by Jupiter. They also exchange, puts Jupiter in its exaltation sign, right? And then the other exchange is what?
Saturn, Venus.
Saturn, Venus. But now here, this is a, well, the other exchange is 7-11. And the Saturn-Venus exchange is 9-6, with some additional malefic influence on Saturn. But you can see that he's running a Mercury Mahadasha. And given the fact that, what time of life it is and what I told you about his current circumstances, he's a undergraduate. What kind of results, this Mercury is interesting to consider. First of all, what are sort of some interesting conditions that it's in?
It's Vargotama.
Number one, it's
Nichabanga.
Vargotama. Number two, well, first thing with any planet in its debilitation sign, you all heard me say, you want to see if it has any effective cancellation. What do we see here?
Jupiter's
It's aspected by sign lord.
Aspected by its sign lord Jupiter. Plus, it's Vargotama. I think you all know about my research or my opinion is about Vargotama debilitated planets. They actually are capable of giving the results very strongly. And what yoga results would Mercury give here?
Buddha-Ticha Yoga.
Sorry?
Buddha-Ticha Yoga.
Buddha-Ticha Yoga. And we want to see here if the Sun and Mercury are combusting, or Sun's combusting. Mercury, I wouldn't say that it is. So it's a good Buddha-Ticha Yoga involving the Lagna Lord. That's why the Sun-Mercury combination here is Buddha-Ticha Yoga. So good for intellectual functioning, right? And again, he's a student. And then what else would you see here about what kind of result Mercury would give yoga-wise?
Mark, it's a 1-7 Raj Yoga.
It's a 1-7 Raja Yoga by placement, first lord in the seventh. Does it give Raja Yoga in any other way?
Also because it's aspected by its dispositor, which is the 7th lord. So it's a 1-7 Raj Yoga that way as well, I'm guessing.
Correct. So one of the ways in which yogas are formed that is oftentimes overlooked was when a planet is in the sign of some planet and aspected by, it's like a mutual aspect, it's like a conjunction. Planets form yogas in this way. This is the 1st and 10th Lord Mercury with the 7th and 4th Lord Jupiter. This is also angle trine. Is there one more way in which Mercury gives the Raja Yoga results?
Mercury is in Kendra and its stabilization is getting cancelled. So it says Nichabanga Raj Yoga.
It also gives Nichabanga Raja Yoga. 3 conditions must be necessary. A planet must be in its debilitation sign, number 1. Number 2, it must have cancellation. Number 3, it should be in an angular trine. Mercury meets all those conditions here. It is Nichabanga Raja Yoga. And he's getting the fruit of this. And he will up until age 28. So good time of life. What it has meant is exceptional educational success, because now see that from the moon, and which would also be Dasha Lagna, what does the moon-Jupiter exchange become?
1-5.
1-5 puts this exalted benefic in the 5th. He's excelling in his academic career. He has a near perfect GPA. He has all A's. He had 1 grade where he got an A-. So he's, an exceptional student. And I want to use this chart also to reiterate something K.N. Rao was a research of K.N. Rao's. He was really good at seeing the educational patterns, the potentials for those in a person's chart, and did a lot of research this way. And out of those researches, he found that when there's mostly the influence of malefics on the 5th house, 5th lord, person is likely to pursue more technical subjects like engineering, right? And also that Rahu is the graha most associated with those who are involved in aeronautics. And this person basically is studying to be an aeronautics engineer. You can see that Saturn, the 5th lord, is with Rahu. It's well placed. Obviously, it goes to the 9th. And he's with Rahu, and he's actually in Mercury Rahu. And right now, he's studying to be an aeronautics engineer. K.N. Rao also liked to see educational patterns using the 5th house, 5th lord from Karakamsha Lagna. Who would be the Karakamsha Lagna here?
Pisces.
No? Virgo.
Virgo.
AK Saturn goes to Virgo in Navamsha. This is how we find the Navamsha, the Karakamsha Lagna, bring it back into the birth chart. And what then are the influences on Capricorn, the 5th house from the Karakamsha Lagna in the Jaimini system using Rashi Dristi?
Saturn Rahu.
Saturn again becomes the 5th lord, aspecting on its own 5th house with Rahu, also aspecting by well, Rahu Ketu both aspecting onto, so again, this is how it can be seen that this person's particular academic pursuit is as a aeronautics engineer. I'm pretty sure he plans to go on to a graduate school subsequent to, and this, normally one would graduate, you would graduate in Mercury Rahu at age 22, but then look what happens. He runs Mercury Jupiter. And then after that, Mercury Saturn, it continues to show exceptional academic achievement and success, which is what Raja Yoga is related at an educational time of life oftentimes mean. Okay, any additional thoughts and comments about this chart before we move on?
Mercury moon make a Dhana yoga.
The Mercury and the moon make a Dhan Yoga. Well, why would they or why wouldn't they?
111.
Right, so, the moon here is a 11th lord, and it's with Mercury, who is a trine lord. This would, of course, not be sort of the best type of Dhan Yoga, because the 11th lord here is completely Amavasya moon, right? And there is the affliction here, and what we haven't talked about, but all these planets in Pisces get the affliction of Mars. It is a 111 combination, and therefore has some Dhan Yoga giving potential, but not that great. Jupiter here, obviously his aspect, will enhance all the planets in Pisces to some degree, but may not actually protect the health as it might otherwise. Okay, so there is.
Mark, can I ask you a question?
Of course, Georgie.
So when we see this combination, like in this chart and some other charts, for example, you have the Lagna Lord that is conjunct Sun and then aspected by strong Jupiter. So can we just make a general assumption that somehow this person will be kind of elevated in life?
Just based on the Sun Jupiter?
Just based on this kind of structure combination around the Lagna Lord.
Well, because we saw the way in which Mercury gives Raja Yoga in 3 different ways, he's going to experience that fruit of that Raja Yoga, and has been in the Mercury major period, but the way he's being successful, the way that Raja Yoga is expressing himself, is in academic achievement. But
I mean just the pure fact that it's with the Sun, someone that is kind of a call it star celebrity or kind of authority, and then the aspect of exalted Jupiter additionally.
In this case, I wouldn't, Georgie. Okay. In other instances, depending on the condition of the sun and additional factors, I would, but in this case, I wouldn't.
Okay.
So just to answer that question, there's, another, the whole article focused on exchanges in the birth charts. I could have added a section, I didn't. I had thought the article was getting too long to begin with, about exchanges in the Vamsha, or exchanges in divisional charts, because they're incredibly important to see as well. And I have made predictions based on them. And one of those, and you've all heard about this prediction maybe too often, is that when I predicted that George W. Bush would defeat Al Gore in the year 2000 presidential election, even though I very much wanted Gore to win, I saw Bush as the winner. And one of the reasons was, there was a lot of reasons, which I outlined in the article I wrote about it prior to the election. But one of the reasons, and a big contributing factor, was he was, at the time of the election, he was running the major period of Saturn and the sub-period of Mars, right? And if you see in the Shamsha, look at what the situation here is between Saturn and Mars. Saturn, of course, goes to the 10th instabilitation sign, but it's in an exchange with Yogacaraka Mars, and Mars is in for both canceling Jupiter's stability. That's a 9-10 Raja Yoga in the 7th, with Mars exalted, and then the exchange giving Saturn Nietzsche, but then it's falling in an angle, Nietzsche Bhanga in the 10th. This Saturn-Mars period looked like a winner to me for a lot of different reasons, but this was certainly one of the reasons. And so never miss this sort of situation. The exchange here in divisional charts as well. And any exchange also in any divisional chart, that period and subperiod will bring significant developments related to that area of life that the divisional chart represents, just because these two planets are exchanging any period and subperiod. For example, when in Navamsha, you have an exchange between two planets, and regardless of whether they're connected to the 7th house, 7th lord, you'll see that that's going to be a period of time, period and subperiod when a person marries. I could show you, I won't bring it up because the person's asked me not to use their chart, but I could show you a prediction that I made about a marriage in November 2023 that I made based on the fact that the period and subperiod of the two planets the person was running were two planets in exchange, with the one planet ruling the 7th house in the birth chart. So think of exchanges in that way as also in any divisional chart. Any exchange is going to be the strongest way in which two planets are connected. When they run that period and subperiod, it should bring significant developments as it relates to the meaning of that divisional chart. Okay, so this is our webinar on exchanges. Now I want to highlight that Peter, who's with us here, he also wrote a much easier and briefer article on exchanges. Also, and if he wants to send out the link to that, or I'll provide the link if people want to see that as well. He's also writing very nice articles on Jyotish. So any final thoughts and questions about exchanges in a birth chart before we go on? Before we end the session.
Mark, just one quick short question. Are there any Graha yogas where these exchanges become significant? I can only think of Lakshmi yoga for a Gemini Lagna between Saturn and Venus.
Well, again, because it's an automatic source of strength, any exchanges forming any kind of yogas, whether they be yogas based on house lordship or Graha yogas, think of Makuta yoga when there's an exchange between the moon and Jupiter, right? Which you'll see in the chart of Bhagwan Rashnish, right? Also in Anandamaya Moa, right? So you got the moon in Sagittarius, Jupiter exalted in Cancer. They not only form an exchange, and it could be an exchange between different house lords, but regardless, they form the Makuta yoga. And hang on here, because I want to show you. I want to show you this. Hold on, I'm going to bring my screen back up here. You've all heard me talk about how we should look at. Can you see a chart again? Is my program up?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So way back in 2013, when I had gotten out of corporate life and started becoming a full-time Jyotish, and I was actually consulting. I was consulted by a man, an Indian man living in the U.S. And after getting a consultation about his chart, he wanted to have a consultation on the chart of his daughters, right? And good parents are always interested in the child doing well academically as a good foundation in life and a good start in life. So, we were discussing educational prospects. It was mostly with the older daughter at the time, more than this younger daughter. But you've all heard me talk about how Graha yogas, and it was quite a revelation for me when I discovered that all Graha yogas given in the ancient texts can and should be applied to the divisional charts, where you'll find them working very well. Now, look down. This person is a college student at this point, and you can see that they're running Moon Jupiter. Look at Sadamsha. Look at D24. What do you notice about the Moon and Jupiter?
Makuta yoga.
They're in an exchange that's also giving Makuta yoga. So what's happened? This woman, one of the best, maybe the best technological schools in the U.S. is Georgia Tech University. And when this person was graduating from high school, they wanted to go there, but couldn't get in. So they went to the University of Georgia, which is also a very fine university. And they have really excelled in their first year there. They've made the dean's list, have a very high GPA, and have reapplied to Georgia Tech and have been now accepted. So 2 educational accomplishments have taken place here in Moon Jupiter. Number 1, she's gotten academic excellence, Dean's List. And number 2, she then was able to get into an institution not easy to get into, her preferred choice, best technological school in the country, Georgia Tech. It's happening in Moon Jupiter. What I'm pointing out is this is predictable based on the Moon Jupiter exchange that also produces Mukuta Yoga. Pulak, I would hope this would answer your question.
It did not. Thank you so much.
Sure. Anything else? All right, we'll conclude for today as we normally do with our Sanskrit prayer. I appreciate everyone's great input here. We had a good, lively discussion. Om Masato Ma Sadgamaya, Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya, Mrityurma Mritam Gamaya, Sarvesham Swasti Bhavatu, Sarvesham Shanti Bhavatu, Sarvesham Purnam Bhavatu, Sarvesham Mangalam Bhavatu, Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu, Om Shanti, 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 Hari Om Tat Sat.